Hi, this is Mark from ITCU Solutions, and today I'd just like to go over how to set up a basic Acronis Cyber Protect cloud setup. I have a couple clients who are evaluating whether they want to go to this from our other solution, and so I thought it would be a good idea to kind of show you how to do a basic setup. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to install a couple agents. So to do that, you just go to Devices, and you click Add. And you go up here. I'm just picking the Windows workstations, and then you save this. You can see I've already downloaded this, but just hit save and it will download to your downloads directory. So I'm going to skip that because it takes a little bit. And then I moved that over to a virtual workstation, so we'll switch over to that real quickly. And in the virtual workstation here, after the agent has been downloaded, we're just going to install it. Now, you probably don't want to install it this way if you have a large network. I have another video if you want to install it through GPO, which is fairly simple. You can also do it just through any other way you want to install an MSI or MST file from the command line or PowerShell or whatever. But in this case, I'm just going to do it the standard way or whatever through the GUI. And again, if you do want to do it through GPO or the other way I'm talking about, you just use this link down here. But in our case, we're just going to install it through the GUI. And I'm just going to pause this while those files download. That tends to take a while. It finished downloading and now it's starting the install, which should go much quicker. It looks like it might be kind of hanging up here, and maybe it will take a little while longer, so I'm going to pause the video. Okay, we now have Acronis installed. I should have unpaused the video for a second because once you install it, you do have to register it. So I didn't show that. But I also went about and actually installed 4 other agents on other devices. So I'm going to switch back to the Cyber Protect Cloud console. And you can see we've installed 4 agents. And that's all we've done at this point for the devices. So you should see all 4 agents hopefully show up here. I have one on a domain controller, my virtual PC, and I also happen to install it on 2 of my physical devices. So once you're done installing your agents, what you really have to do is set up your locations for storage if you're not going to use the Acronis Cloud, which I'll do right now. And then you have to go through and basically set up all of your plans. For anything that you use, backup, antivirus, scripting, monitoring, whatever you're going to do, if you want to set up remote management, you have to create a plan for it. But the first thing before we even set up the plans, because I'm going to use a local NAS for my storage instead of the Acronis Cloud, is if you're going to do something else, you actually want to set up your storage locations before you set up your plans, because the storage location will be part of your plan. As you can see right off the bat, the Acronis Cloud storage is already set up. Let's see here. I don't know why it's, I hope I'm actually still logged in. Because I just want to add a location here. Okay, here we go. So in my case, since I'm going to do a NAS, that's going to be a network folder. And so for the NAS, it's IP. You can put in, if you have your DNS set up correctly, you can put in your name for this. I don't have my NAS in the DNS, so I'm just putting in an IP address. And then I created a directory on the NAS just called backup. And I'm going to send all my backups to that for now. In reality, if you were doing this, since I've just created a second storage location, and I have to give it the NAS credentials, and you probably don't want to use the admin if you're doing this again. You'd probably want to create your own backup user for Acronis to connect to your NAS with. But since the point of this is Acronis, I'm not too worried about it. Okay, and so this shows you exactly how the NAS is laid out, that there's a backup directory, and this is what's in that backup directory. So we got our storage location. And if you were using something like Backblaze or something like that, you could also set that up as a cloud storage location as well. In fact, the way we generally do this is, if we're going to back up complete machines, we always back them up to a NAS, and then commonly you can synchronize the NAS with a cloud service like Backblaze, or you can just back up files from maybe your server to the cloud, because cloud storage costs money. So generally I try not to back up full machines to the cloud unless you're doing some type of disaster recovery. But if I have data like shared drives that have lots of user data or something that it would almost be impossible to recover from, if you had a ransomware attack or something without having, I'll try to have that backed up to the cloud, or at least to a external drive such as a USB off of my NAS. Okay, so after you have your location set up for your backup, the next thing is you just basically have to set up the plans. So you go to your management, and the first thing we're going to do, this is probably the most important plan. This handles your backup. This will handle basically your antivirus. So we're going to create a protection plan first. Okay. So we'll edit the name here. And you could create separate plans for each of your devices, but the hope is that you can standardize them. So I'm just going to call this my default plan. Like, you probably would have different plans for possibly for your, obviously, anything that requires a different backup. So you'd probably have different plans for workstations and for servers. But in this example, I'm just going to create one plan, call it my default plan. And since I'm not going to back up the entire machine, which is the default, I'm just going to back up some files and folders. And we're going to create a rule. If you back up files and folders, there's a bunch of default things, like if you want to back up all files or your default profiles or whatever, the Windows directory, or if you're doing Linux, some type of Linux or Unix or something, you got the home, root, user, etc. In my case, I already have drives, or I have the specific files I want to back up. So I can't remember what they are. I'm looking. Oh yeah, there we go. So on one of my machines, the file I want to back up is just called C backup. Okay, so I'm going to add that rule, and then we'll do C test backup. For some reason, I added folders that didn't have the same name. If you were doing this and you had the same name, it's going to back up these names on any of your machines. I'm just adding them because for some reason, when I created folders to put my test backup in, that's probably good enough for now. But just to show, you can add multiple rules for different backups. You can use like the predisposed if you're just going to do. If you could find the wildcards for the machines. You could also use these things like just for any user profile or whatever you're trying to back up. But for this test, we're only going to try to back up stuff. And if I spelled these right, in the actual backup directory and the test backup directories I've created on my machines. And so if you do a general rule, you have to add a rule for each different directory you create or whatever you're doing. Because I'm going to have this default plan applied to multiple workflows. As we discussed, is basically in this case just going to be workstation. So if you're going to have a different plan for different workstations, then you don't have to do that. Hopefully that makes sense. So, okay, that creates our, we don't want to do cloud storage, right? We want to do it to our NAS. And again, it's going to make me give it the credentials. Okay, so we're going to go to the NAS. I'm not going to worry about the schedule too much. When you set your schedule, this is probably going to be based a lot on, you know, how much storage you have. Like the default schedule where you keep your monthlies for 6 months, weeklies for 4 weeks, dailies for 7 days is probably a good idea. If you don't have a lot, you know, that's a lot to store over that amount of time. You know, you might actually decide not to do it by age, for example. You could do it by number of backups. You know, obviously, infinitely, you better have a lot of storage. But you could do something like number of backups if you have limited room, save a small NAS, or you don't want to use a lot of cloud storage. You might change this to, you know, I only want to keep the last 10 backups or something like that. Especially if you're not doing dailies and you're only doing weeklies or monthlies, that's probably a pretty good option. I think realistically for most of my clients, we probably don't have the storage more, than to do a couple months. So I'm going to put in a couple months. And I do want it to clean up. And what the cleanup, all this is doing is basically saying, okay, when the backup's done, go back and look. If I have any monthlies that are older than 2 months, let's get rid of them. If we have any weeklies that are older than 4 weeks, or dailies that are older than 7 days, let's remove those files. And you can also create a cleanup plan too if you don't trust this. Let me get this out of the way so we can get done. Okay, so basically, and I'm just, since we're you probably should use encryption. I'm going to turn it off just for this demonstration. Obviously, you probably want to actually use encryption, but I'm just going to turn it off so I can look at the files, or not necessarily look at the files, but to speed up retrieval just so I can check it. Excuse me. So I think we're pretty good for our backup plan, which is what we just created there. I'm not worrying about EDR. I do want my antivirus basically plan. I think for what we're doing here, now we're on, you probably want to run self-protection. This limits what can be changed on your machine, at least if it doesn't cause any problems. I would recommend that, even though by default it's off. The rest is probably pretty good. I want to quarantine. So I think for what we're doing here, this is pretty good. Again, if you didn't have, my clients, we tend to have external categories to filter. So if you wanted to come in, if you didn't have, say, like your firewall, or you don't have a HTTP filter, URL filter, it would probably be a good idea to come in here and pick stuff and say, hey, I don't want to allow, you know, like gambling or hacking or whatever, obviously illegal activities, illegal downloads. Maybe you don't want instant messaging, definitely not narcotics. But you can deny it here. Just keep in mind, if you have another URL filter on your network, if you do it here as well as there, that could cause some confusion with the redundancy. So you might want to just leave that all allowed the way it is by default if you have some other service that's doing that for you. Okay, I don't want Microsoft Defender on, obviously, because I'm using the Acronis antivirus, which uses Bitdefender signatures, which I think is a pretty decent product, so I don't want to use Microsoft Defender. I do want the firewall on. We don't want Microsoft External. We do want the vulnerability assessment. This is what goes through and checks your machine to make sure you're it's basically a scan that just alerts me into the reports for problems. So I definitely want that to run once a week. Think of it kind of like an antivirus scan each week. I want this to do my patch management. I'm going to look for everything. It does more than just Windows patch management. it does a lot of different vendors. So we want to leave that in our report. I'm going to leave the data protection plan on. I'm going to create for device control. I'm going to go through and actually do a plan for this. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. I just want it on, and I want it to be completely allowed. And data loss prevention, I tend to work with a lot of financial institutions. So this is something that we'd probably use. You can create a plan for data loss prevention as well. I'm not going to go over to disaster recovery today because that's kind of a bigger subject. But so I think all of this is pretty good. What I would want in my original, most important, the protection plan. So we'll create this. Okay, so that plan had basically our antivirus, our backups, and also decides which services to have on. And we can add the devices now, or we could add them later. Doesn't really matter. But I'm going to just put all my devices on this. Obviously, since I have a server in there, probably in reality, well, I'll put it on all the workstations for now. I would probably create something different for the servers. So we'll just add these guys to the plan. In my network, because there's a lot of things here that basically you probably don't want the antivirus on your server, for example. Basically what you probably want to run on your server is backup. Yeah, maybe antivirus, depending on what you're doing. But most likely, there's at least a lot of people won't be running the Acronis antivirus on there. And this is telling you what you need to purchase for the things I selected. You might not want all these things just because it might be more expensive than what you want to do. So we got that plan. We have it applied to all of our workstations. And I need to create a plan basically for anything I'm going to do. So now that we have our protection plan, I'm also going to create a remote management plan because I want to be able to manage workstations through this on my network if they have this. I'm not going to change this very much, but the one thing I am going to get rid of RDP. I think NIR is probably, in theory at least, a more secure protocol, so I don't want to run RDP. If you're only doing this inside your network, RDP is probably totally fine. But in my case, since it's being set to the cloud, I want to stick with NIR, which is the Acronis protocol for remote desktop. Security settings. Yeah, I want all this because I want the users to grant me permission. So that's all good. Now, by default, you might want to be able to take screenshots. This is up to you. I'll check it. That's just depends on how much need. If you're an external contractor like me, it's probably more useful than someone that works inside their own network. Let's display settings will be fine to show us. Okay, the rest is all great. So this is the remote management plan, which is basically just selecting which protocol you want to use for remote management. And then I'm not going to worry about a scripting plan, but I will. The way these work is, before I set up the monitoring plan, is that you can go to your script repository, and some of these are pretty useful. I've tried them out; they work pretty well. You can create your own script, or you can. There's 42 basically scripts that Acronis has already created in the library. And if you want to add, you have to get these into your My script. So if you want to add a script, for example, some of the things I think might be pretty advantageous. If you want to enable a firewall, for example, on Windows, you have to come over here and clone it. Okay, and this is, assuming, but we're just going to approve it because it's a out of the box script. But you probably wouldn't approve it until you tested it out and made sure it worked. For this purpose, I just want to show you that it ends up in My scripts up here. So if you set up a script plan, you can use whatever in your My scripts. can be used as part of your plan. You have to get them from the library up here. Okay, so that's all you have to do. You can also create your own, or you can edit the existing scripts. We're not going to worry about that today. Monitor plan you're going to want to set up, because a lot of the reason for using Acronis is to have it monitor your machine so you can create reports and all the so if you just look at custom here, basically I would check virtually everything if you're going to set up a monitoring plan, what you can add. So if you hit the default, you're going to want see, basically if you have a Windows machine, right, you're going to want all this stuff, generally speaking. I mean, there might be something you don't want, like the Windows event log, but most of these things I think would be fairly useful. So, like, definitely I want this. Definitely CPU. Oops, I guess I'm not hitting shift. Oh, so that's fine. Whatever the okay, so I should have just did the default to start with, but if you go in, we're going to want to do stuff like CPU temperature, and you can modify these. I'm just going to do a couple more here. I want disk space. But I would recommend picking most of these monitors. We'll do just one more just to make sure we have disk space, definitely. And then firewall status would be a very okay. The rest of those, I just want something to show up on in my monitor page. So, okay, so we'll create that monitoring plan. But like I said, if you're doing this for real, I'd probably accept the defaults, and then if you want to add some additional monitors later on, just add them. So we have, you could, I'm not going to do this, but you could create a cleanup. I believe this is where you create the cleanup plan. This is if you don't trust your current cleanup, like you want it to go in additionally to look for old files and folders on the cloud or wherever you're backing your stuff up on your local NAS. And it might not also be a bad idea to create a validation plan. If for validation, just so you see how this works, is there's two ways to create a validation. Let's see. So everyone's probably just going to do a checksum validation, but let's say you have a nice virtual space, kind of like I have in my lab, and you have plenty of horsepower with these things. To validate some of the backups, if you're backing up the entire machine, you could validate it by restoring it as a virtual device just to make sure that it works. For a lot of people, that's not going to be possible, but you can validate from checksum, which isn't going to be perfect, but it should catch at least some of the errors. So it's not a bad idea to do a validation plan. This is just telling which agent to actually do the validation. You can pick whichever agent you want. So you can pick a location. So in my case, right, I would be validating my NAS. If I did a validation plan, again, you have to put in but all this is doing is allowing that agent to go look at backups, and you're going to pick a time to look at those backups and make sure that the checksum, and you can pick a schedule when you want it to do this, to make sure that what you've been saving as backups will work when you go to restore it, that they're valid. Okay, so we'll call that good. So these are all the things you basically have to set up to get going. It's not a super complicated product, So once you've applied these to your devices, so if we go back to all devices, when you look at a device, okay, you want to make sure, if you go to Protect or as your primary place to go, whatever plans you're using for this particular device should show up here. So we have a default plan, and I don't have, that's all I have. So I need to add the other plans that I want to work with this workstation. So I would go in here and I would add the monitor plan. I would add, and there's also going to be some default plans you could add, which I'm not using in this demonstration. So we'll add our monitoring plans. This should already be added. Antivirus. Okay. So we just, all we have is the default, which is my main security plan, which contains most of the primary things. But the other thing I'm going to want to add is my remote plan. Which apparently I just called new remote management plan. Not very good. Not very good. But you also see there is some default security plans that, you know, I'm just going to show them real quick here. I'm not using them. I created my own. But if you're restricted on, you know, like they have remote, this shows you what you have to buy if you want to go with this. So if you just want to do the essentials, you just need the advanced security. You can't do some of the things that I would prefer to do. I want the advanced management because that allows a lot of the monitoring, which since if you work in the financial industry, you have auditors. So if you want the reports and things like that, you probably want something that includes the advanced management. Something like office workers, this would be a good plan by default to start with. Or you could create your own like I did. So, but you just want to make sure that the plans you need, so shoot, it's not, oh, there you go. You just want to make sure whichever machines you want them on. I'm going to uncheck this guy because I already put him on there. And you can also assign things to a group as well. Whoops, there we go. Because I need to add, so if these are in a group, I'm going to have to do this one at a time. And since I'm using the virtual PC, I need to assign the additional plans I want, or at least one more to it for now. So we're going to add the monitor. And the remote workers, remote management plan. Okay, and so we'll do the same for this guy. And like I said, you don't have to do it one at a time like I'm doing it. You could add these to a group and apply all these plans at once, or you could have, I probably could have did it when I created the original plans as well. When I went to add stuff to the plan, I could have did it that way, which would have been quicker. But this is kind of what you would do if you forget to do something. You add someone, you forget that, or it's just a new one-off. This is the way you would do it. Okay, and so these are all the plans I want my workstations to be on. And also when you bring something up like this too, so this shows you all your plans. If you go back down to your default plan, which I normally, if I was doing this, I would add the default plan last actually, but so if you go down here, I can start a backup from here because this is where my backup plan is at. So if I wanted to test a backup, which I'll do, I'll just click run, and this should initiate a backup for this client to my NAS, which will take just a little bit, but you can do all that through the plans themselves. So everything's right here in front of you. You should be able to see everything that your workflow, or in this case your computer, whatever you want to call it, is doing. Okay, so I just initiated that just to kind of, so I can test that out later on. So now that I've added all these things, if I go back to oops, just gotta scroll up here to my monitor page, I should start getting some data. Yeah, activities, I'm starting health status, I'm getting some things, but you want to add more and more monitors in here, and as you add more and more monitors, you'll get, like, I should add a monitor for installation status, for example. So I could go back down to my management, you can go edit your plan and just add additional monitors. I think patch, or maybe you have to set up a patch management plan. It's been a little bit since I've done this. Oh, Windows Update status, yes. Right, and probably several other monitors you'd want to add. Just looking real quick here. And part of the other thing too, you can do inventories on these. So you want to have, and all these would have been part of that default monitor if I had just clicked through that, which is what I should have done. So I don't have to go through looking for install hardware changes. That's something else I want. Okay, so that's making sure you have the proper monitors. So not only will it show up in your monitor page here, right? So as it starts doing these things, I should get more and more monitors coming in. But this is all going to be based on whatever, you know, patch installation, all these types of things, dependent on your monitor status. Now this thing can also generate reports, and this is important too because a lot of times your auditors will want to see stuff like oops, yeah, this is bringing up all the different reports you can create, but again, you have to have the services, you have to have the services initiated, and also the monitors in place. activities. Why if I... Well, so you can see what you need to do on all these. And if you go back to devices, and you want to look at your individual devices after setting things up, the way we have, oh, he's showing me I got to disable firewall. Okay. You can check your patches from here, because I think we have patch management enabled. Maybe I don't. I'll have to go back and look at my report there. But I do know I added a connection report. Wait, am I on the virtual? I am not on the virtual. So if you want to, oh, let's uncheck him. Okay. So for example, if you want to connect to a machine and control it, I got kicked out. I want to make sure the machine's actually up. I think it's, well, we'll use my administrator. It hasn't popped up yet, so. Okay, so I'm going to allow, and it shows that, you know, you're now connected in, brings up a connection window. So this is what will allow you to control other people's machines. You don't have to set it to make them give you permission. You can do it in other ways where it just kicks you on. And you can see that I'm connected in on near because I disabled remote desktop. But that's how the remoting feature works. And let's go back. Cyber Protect here. I might just pause the video so I can actually collect some more data here. I might turn on some more monitors so you can see more of the information pop up here. So I'm going to pause the video to let this thing have, I'm going to kick off a couple scans so I can get the information here so you can see what it looks like. Okay, I just want to generate a little bit of data so you can see what your landing screen would look like. I still have the 4 machines. I installed a patch on my server. I ran some vulnerability scans just so I could get all this information up here because I didn't want to wait for it. And the one thing I did forget to go over was patch management. Now that I'm looking at this guy, now that we have the patch screen. And if you look at one of your machines and you go to patch management, okay, this can do multiple types of things, but you can just go ahead, if you want to install it, you would just click install, which I just did this to install like one of the simple security patches. And then of course that will start reasonable time, maybe 30 minutes or whatever. But that'll go ahead and try to install the patch, and like it says, go to activities, which is under your monitor. Will show you that it's in the process of installing it. So I just had installed a patch that succeeded. This one's pending. It may or may not complete for 30 minutes. So that's one of the things. And the other thing, just to take a quick look at, actually not on the devices, that I should have also mentioned about patches, is if you go to the, well, I guess we could do it in devices, doesn't matter. If you go to your devices and you go to look at your Protect plan, this will also show you all the options you have for patching. Well, so if you, and of course everything, a lot of these things are under the, oops, I go back to protection, not the remote. So the patch management. Let's see. So this will tell you what choices you have, and I thought I could change it here. Maybe I have to go under the, but you can run your patch scan here, and you can also run your vulnerability scan up here. Okay, so you must have to do it under, doesn't matter which one, I think they both contain it. Whoop. I didn't do anything there. I didn't mean to do that. Let's do that again. Let's edit the plan. I think this one might be a little shorter, but I guess it probably doesn't really matter. So if you go down to patch management here, I think it could be under settings. So you can change your which updates you want, whether it's all updates, security, update specific products. If you want to look at, this is what I wanted to show, is that it does have a lot of different products you can run the patches for. I would probably recommend, if you have any of these, just literally, you know, whoops, selecting them all and leaving them all, and then all these different products will become under the patch manager of Acronis. And as you can see, there's this might just be only the Windows products, but there's also but you can see it's a lot, and then there's also like 38 yeah, that's a lot of products. Is this only Windows? Let's see, so only security. There's also a point for whoops. Oh, third party. That's what I was looking for. So I'm only doing this because I want to show you what products the Adobe can handle. So there's an awful lot, or not Adobe, the Cyber Protect Acronis agent can handle. So it has all of the Adobe, Oracle type products, Google Chrome, the things that most people typically use, and a lot more you can see in here, that Zoom, that this guy will handle the patching for you if you want to use it as your patch manager. So that's very beneficial. And then I just wanted to make sure you could see that and how you can change those. It already has a default for that, so you don't have to do what I just did. But that's just kind of a view in general. When you set this up, basically all you have to do is start out with, let's get out of this, with adding your devices. Go into devices, add, come on, let's get back to that screen. There you go. So you just have to start with adding your devices by downloading the software. Then you're going to create all your plans, your protection plan, your remote management plan, scripting plan if you need it, your monitoring plans. These three for sure. The backup scan, this is more if you just want to scan vulnerabilities in your backup. It's probably a good idea. Same with replication. These are kind of extra things you do, cleanup plans, things like that. And kind of the last thing I'll talk about is reporting. You can create all kinds of, for your fit score reporting, which, by the way, if you ever look at how this is done, like the VPN, this is kind of, I don't want to say it's silly, but for example, I happen to have a VPN on this machine, so it's giving me a better fit score. Obviously, if you just had a desktop at work, this doesn't make a lot of sense. Also, if you're using BitLocker or something, if you have BitLocker VPN client and you get UNTLM, you should, just by having the Acronis client installed, you would end up with effectively a perfect cyber fit score. Now, I know disk encryption and VPN, probably if you're just using a desktop, you don't need those, most likely, depending on your security plan, or it's at least possible you don't need those. So you're not going to get a perfect cyber fit score with your desktops, but your laptops, you probably should have it set up that you get a perfect score for cyber fit. But it has all these different things you can create reports on. And probably just to give you an idea, I downloaded a couple. Here's the software inventory report. I know I only have, this is just for the 4 devices you see up here. So if you are doing inventory, let me click on that. But this could be very useful. It gives you a list of all the different software that's basically running on the 4 machines I have out there, which isn't a lot. It's basically PuTTY, Microsoft, and Fortinet, and a few other financial programs. Also, I pulled a hardware inventory for these things. So I only pulled it on 2 of the machines, but you can see for 2 of the machines, it gives you, the name of the machine, the OS, all these types of versions. Plus, it gives you the hardware details for that device, and so this could be useful too if you need to track inventory. I realize it's not a perfect report for that, but it's pretty helpful to have the hardware inventory show up like this, and I also think the software inventory to give you a good idea of what software you have out there. And you don't have to do it this way. You can also do, I just pulled a report for alerts, something if you want to give to your auditor. Anything you see up there, you could basically do a PDF of. You could also do that for your hardware and software inventory. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what else you might need in case, for me in the financial industry, you have a auditor, FDIC or NCUA or whatever they want. This can give you a lot of the information that you can hand to them to show you that everything's patched or whatever you need to know, whatever they need to know. I hope this was helpful. It's a fairly simple product to use. Sorry about having to pause things a lot, but I think if I didn't, this would take forever. It probably made the video a little disjointed. But like I said, it's pretty easy to set up. You just have to add the devices. If you want to see how to do it through GPO, I have another video. I can throw a link in the description for that. And yeah, it's a pretty simple product, and it puts it all here. It grants you remote access. It does your patch management. It does a lot of great reporting. It's not Kaseya, but it does a lot of what Kaseya does for a lot less. And it's something I'm looking to try to push a lot of my clients on. And I hope this was useful for anyone watching. Thank you.